When did you realize you needed a raise? I was scanning groceries at Walmart Register 6 when this guy in his 30s walked up with a full cart he couldn't pay for. He looked normal enough wearing jeans and a polo shirt, but something about his eyes seemed off. They kept darting around like he was checking for cameras or security guards. He unloaded his cart with the usual stuff like bread, milk, and frozen dinners. I scanned everything and gave him the total of $127.43. That's when he looked me straight in the eye and said he wanted the senior discount. I almost laughed thinking he was joking, but his expression stayed deadly serious. "I'll need to see your ID for the senior discount, sir," I said, following store policy. The guy was maybe 35 at most with dark hair and no wrinkles. Company rules said the senior discount was for customers 65 and older. There was no way this guy qualified and we both knew it. But he pulled out his wallet and handed me his license anyway. The ID confirmed he was born in 1990, making him 35 years old. I handed it back and explained that the senior discount was only for customers over 65. His face turned red and he gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. Other customers in line started shifting uncomfortably. "Fine. You won't give it to me?" Before I could respond, he reached behind his back and pulled out a handgun. My heart stopped as he pointed it directly at my chest. The customer behind him screamed and people started running for the exits. My hands went up automatically while my mind tried to process what was happening. He leaned over the counter and spoke very quietly so only I could hear. He told me to bag all his groceries without charging him. His hand was steady holding the gun, and I knew he was serious. With shaking hands, I started putting his items in bags while voiding the transaction on my register. My manager, Sandra, was at customer service and saw what was happening. She hit the silent alarm but stayed where she was, probably following protocol about not escalating armed situations. I kept bagging groceries, trying not to look at the gun pointed at me. Milk, bread, canned goods all went into bags like this was normal. When everything was bagged, he ordered me to help carry them to his car. I wanted to refuse, but the gun was still aimed at me. He grabbed several bags with his free hand and motioned for me to pick up the rest. We walked out of the store together with him slightly behind me, keeping the weapon concealed but ready. The parking lot felt miles long as we walked to his sedan. He popped the trunk and told me to load the bags inside. As I leaned in to place the groceries, I heard something that made my blood freeze. There was muffled banging coming from deeper in the trunk and a voice crying out, "Help me! Please, somebody help me!" I dropped the bags and stumbled backward. There was someone locked in his trunk. The banging got louder and more desperate. The man grabbed my arm and shoved the gun into my ribs, telling me to finish loading the groceries and keep my mouth shut. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the bags. Once everything was loaded, he slammed the trunk shut, cutting off the muffled cries. He opened the passenger door and ordered me to get in. I shook my head because getting in that car meant I might end up in the trunk too. But he pressed the gun harder into my side and I had no choice. I slid into the passenger seat thinking about whoever was trapped in the trunk. The car smelled like fast food and cigarettes. He got in the driver's side, still keeping the gun trained on me. Through the windshield, I could see police cars pulling into the parking lot with lights flashing but no sirens. He saw them too and cursed under his breath. Instead of trying to drive away, he turned to me with this calm expression that was scarier than anger. He told me I was going to walk back into the store and tell everyone this was a misunderstanding. If I said anything about the trunk, he'd come back for me. "You have kids?" he asked suddenly. I nodded, thinking of my 6-year-old daughter. "Then you'll do exactly what I say. Get out slowly and walk back inside. Tell them I paid and you were helping a customer. Nothing else." I opened the door on shaky legs, knowing I was about to make an impossible choice. Save whoever was in that trunk or protect myself and my family from this man's threats. The police were getting closer, and I had seconds to decide. As I stood up, he grabbed my wrist one last time. "Her name is Carolyn, my ex-wife. She's been in there since yesterday, so you better hurry if you want her to make it." My legs moved before my brain could catch up. I stumbled toward the nearest police car, waving my arms and pointing at the sedan. "There's someone in the trunk!" The words came out as a scream. The gunman's face went from calm to pure rage in half a second. 3 officers rushed the car with their weapons drawn, while 2 others grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me behind a patrol car. My whole body shook, knowing what I'd just done to my family. The gunman threw the car in reverse and slammed the gas pedal, trying to ram through the police cars behind him. More units had already boxed him in, though. The muffled screaming from the trunk got louder and more desperate. Carolyn was pounding with what sounded like both fists now. The gunman jumped out of the driver's side and took off running across the parking lot. 2 officers sprinted after him while others surrounded the car. One cop used his baton to pop the trunk, while another called for paramedics on his radio. The trunk flew open and Carolyn tumbled out onto the asphalt. She was gasping and crying at the same time. Her wrists had deep rope burns and her clothes were soaked in urine. She'd been trapped in there since yesterday in the summer heat. The smell hit me and I had to turn away. 2 paramedics ran over with their equipment and started checking her vitals. She kept saying "thank you" over and over between sobs. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. An officer in a suit walked up to me while the medics worked. "I'm Detective Edwin Cartwright," he said, showing his badge. "I need your full statement right now while everything's fresh." My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean against the patrol car to stay upright. The adrenaline was wearing off and my whole body started shaking harder. Cartwright guided me to his unmarked car and opened the passenger door for me. "They got him," he said as we pulled out of the parking lot, 2 blocks away, hiding in someone's backyard behind their shed. He explained that the gunman would be processed and held without bail given the kidnapping charge. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said, turning onto the main road. I started talking and realized my shift had started only 90 minutes ago. It felt like days had passed since I'd clocked in at Register 6. Time felt broken and stretched in weird ways. Nothing made sense anymore. At the station, I had to tell my story 3 different times to different people. First to Cartwright alone, then to him and another detective, then to a woman who typed everything on an old computer. They recorded each version on different devices. Cartwright showed me a photo lineup with 6 pictures of similar-looking men. My fingers shook as I pointed at the gunman immediately. There was no doubt in my mind. They told me Carolyn was stable but heading to the hospital for observation and a full exam. The rope burns needed treatment, and she was severely dehydrated. Sandra showed up at the station about an hour later to give her own statement. She found me in the waiting area and sat down beside me. "Corporate's sending their asset protection team tomorrow," she said quietly. "You're on paid leave starting right now." She looked worried about me. "Don't worry about your shifts or anything else." I just nodded because I was too tired to think about bills or schedules. My brain had shut down to basic functions only. Everything felt distant and unreal, like I was watching someone else's life. Cartwright drove me back to the Walmart parking lot around 11 that night to get my car. The crime scene tape was gone, but I could still see the sedan's skid marks on the asphalt. He handed me his business card with another number written on the back. "That's for Thelma Holden, our victim advocate," he explained. "She'll help you navigate everything that's coming." He paused before continuing. "The gunman's being held without bail for now, but there will be hearings." His next words made my stomach drop. "You'll need to testify." The word testify echoed in my head as I drove to my ex-wife's house. Bethany had been watching our daughter since I'd dropped her off that morning before my shift. My daughter was at the kitchen table doing math homework when I walked in. Bethany took one look at my face and knew something terrible had happened. I mouthed the word later over her head and scooped up my kid. "Ready to go home?" I asked, trying to sound normal. My daughter started chattering about her day and what her friend Miley said at recess. I carried her to the car and buckled her in while she kept talking. The whole drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. She didn't notice anything wrong. She was still talking about Miley's new puppy when we pulled into our driveway. After 2 stories and a glass of water, my daughter finally fell asleep in her bed. I stood in her doorway for a minute just watching her breathe. Then I went to my bathroom and called Bethany. I told her everything in whispers so I wouldn't wake my daughter. The gun, the trunk, Carolyn, the police, all of it came out in a rush. Bethany stayed quiet until I finished. "She should stay with me for a few days," she said immediately. "Until you know it's safe." I wanted to agree, but I needed my daughter close to me right now. "We need a safety plan," I said instead. We spent 20 minutes working out code words and pickup procedures. If I said purple dinosaur on the phone, she'd know to call 911 and come get our daughter immediately. We agreed on specific times for calls and check-ins. Bethany would pick her up from the school instead of the bus for now. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight and I was running on empty. I dragged myself to my daughter's room and sat down in her doorway with my back against the frame. Her nightlight cast shadows on the wall that kept making me jump. Every few minutes, I'd get up and check the front door lock, then the back door, then the windows. The deadbolt clicked under my fingers for the 5th time that hour. Back to her doorway. Watch her small chest rise and fall under her princess blanket. Check my phone. Check the locks again. The house creaked and I froze, listening hard. Just the house settling. At 3 in the morning, my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message was only 6 words, but they made my hands shake so bad I almost dropped the phone. "You should have kept quiet." I took a screenshot with trembling fingers and forwarded it to Cartwright's number even though I knew he was probably asleep. The rest of the night crawled by with me jumping at every sound. When my alarm went off at 6:30, I was still sitting in that doorway. My daughter woke up asking for pancakes, but I could barely focus on the stove. The eggs stuck to the pan and started smoking. I scraped them into the trash and tried again. They burned again. My daughter watched me from the table with her juice box. "Daddy, why are you being weird?" she asked. I forced a smile and told her there was just a problem at work yesterday, but everything was fine now. She nodded and went back to her coloring book. 6-year-olds believe their parents can fix anything. Third try on the eggs worked and I got some toast going too. We ate in silence while I kept glancing at my phone waiting for Cartwright to respond. After breakfast, I helped her get dressed and we headed out to the car. The drive to her school took us right past the Walmart where everything happened. 3 news vans sat in the parking lot with reporters doing their morning segments. My phone buzzed with a news alert and the headline made my stomach flip. "Woman rescued from trunk after Walmart kidnapping." At least they didn't use my name. I turned off all my news notifications and focused on the road. My daughter sang along to the radio in the back seat, totally unaware of what those vans meant. After dropping her at the school, I was heading home when my phone rang with a number I didn't know. The man introduced himself as the corporate asset protection manager for our region and asked if I could come to the store for a formal incident report. I didn't want to go back there, but he said it was required. 2 hours later, I sat in a conference room while he typed everything I said into his laptop. He asked the same questions over and over about exact timing, what the gunman said, why I went outside with him. His fingers clicked on the keys as I explained about the gun for the 4th time. When we finished, he slid a paper across the table with an employee assistance number and said they'd provide security escorts for my shifts if I wanted them. I drove home feeling drained from repeating the story again. I just walked in my door when the phone rang. I answered without checking the number. Someone breathed into the phone for 10 long seconds without saying anything. The breathing was slow and deliberate. Then they hung up. My fingers fumbled as I called Cartwright right away. He answered on the second ring and said he'd have them trace the call. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He also promised to increase the patrol cars driving by my house. Having cops nearby should have made me feel safer, but it just made everything feel more dangerous and real. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and replaying that moment in the parking lot when I had to choose. What if the gunman really did have people on the outside who'd come after us? Every car that drove past made me tense up. Around midnight, my daughter padded into my room dragging her stuffed elephant. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. I pulled back the covers and she climbed in next to me. She fell back asleep in minutes, but I stayed awake listening to her breathe and watching the shadows move across the wall. Morning came too soon, and I made breakfast without burning anything this time. My phone rang while I was washing dishes. A woman named Thelma Holden introduced herself as the victim advocate assigned to my case. Her voice was calm and steady as she explained all the resources available like counseling and financial assistance if I needed time off work. She didn't rush me or make me feel stupid for asking questions. We set up a meeting for the next day to fill out some paperwork. 20 minutes after Thelma hung up, Cartwright called with an update. They'd traced yesterday's breathing call to a burner phone bought with cash at a gas station. He said they were pulling security footage to see who bought it. Then he mentioned something that made my chest tight. The gunman's family had hired a defense attorney who was already filing motions to get evidence thrown out. The legal stuff was starting and I wasn't ready for any of it. My daughter came into the kitchen asking if we could go to the park like we always did on Saturdays. I looked out at the perfect sunny day and made up something about the weather being too cold. She gave me a confused look since it was obviously warm outside. I could see her trying to figure out why I was lying. We ended up watching movies on the couch instead while I kept getting up to check the windows. Every few minutes I'd peek through the blinds at the street. My daughter asked why I kept looking outside, and I said I was just checking something. Halfway through the second movie, my phone rang again. Human Resources calling to confirm my status. The woman on the phone said I was on paid administrative leave pending review of the incident. She kept saying it was standard procedure, but that word review made me nervous. What if they decided I'd done something wrong by going outside with him? What if they fired me? I couldn't afford to lose this job with a kid to support and bills piling up. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Cartwright saying the gunman had been arraigned that morning, and the judge denied bail after hearing about the kidnapping. He said prosecutor Cyril Beckham wanted to meet with me next week to go over everything before the bond hearing. I felt some relief knowing the guy was locked up, but also knew this whole mess was just getting started. The bond hearing came faster than I expected, and I had to take another day off work to testify. Walking into that courtroom made my stomach turn because the gunman was sitting right there at the defense table staring at me the whole time. I told the judge exactly what happened while trying not to look at him. His lawyer kept arguing for house arrest with an ankle monitor, saying his client had mental health issues and wasn't a flight risk. The judge wasn't buying it and kept him locked up, saying witnesses needed protection. Carolyn was there too, looking really thin and tired, but she nodded at me when I finished testifying. After court, I was walking to my car when this guy in a suit approached me saying he was the defense investigator and just needed to ask a few questions about inconsistencies in my statement. I remembered what Thelma told me about not talking to anyone from the defense team without the prosecutor present. I told him no, and walked away fast while pulling out my phone to call Cartwright. He said it was typical defense tactics trying to trip up witnesses and to stay alert for more attempts. That night, someone posted on Facebook that I was the cashier who let the armed robber walk away and should have done more to stop him. The comments started piling up with people calling me a coward and saying I was basically an accomplice for not fighting back. My phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't talked to since high school, asking if it was really me. The post got taken down after a few hours, but screenshots were already spreading around. When I finally went back to work the next week, the asset protection team had arranged a security guard to walk me to and from my car for every shift. They offered to move me to overnight stocking where there'd be less customer interaction, but I couldn't take nights because of childcare for my daughter. They ended up installing new panic buttons at every register and moving me to register 12, which was closer to the office. My first day back went okay until I had to walk through the Target parking lot later to grab milk. A car backfired near me and I hit the ground instantly thinking it was a gunshot. People were staring at me scrambling behind a car while I tried to catch my breath and figure out what happened. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to drive home. Thelma called the next day to help me apply for victim compensation funds to cover my therapy co-pays and lost wages. The paperwork was crazy complicated with all these forms, asking for receipts and documentation I didn't have. She came to my house and basically filled everything out while I just signed where she pointed. She said the fund usually approved cases like mine within a few weeks and could cover up to $5,000 in expenses. Cartwright stopped by later that week with some files to show me about the gunman's history. Turns out he had 3 prior domestic violence calls with Carolyn, but she never pressed charges. The pattern was getting worse each time, starting with verbal threats, then property damage, then this kidnapping. It helped me understand there was no way I could have predicted how far he'd take things. Prosecutor Beckham scheduled a 3-hour meeting to prepare me for the preliminary hearing testimony coming up. He went through every possible question the defense might ask and how to answer without giving them ammunition. He kept reminding me to stick to just the facts and not add opinions or guesses about what I thought was happening. My head was pounding by the end from concentrating so hard on getting every detail right. He said the defense would try to make me look confused or unreliable, but to just tell the truth and stay calm. 2 days later, my daughter's school called saying she'd told her teacher during sharing time that bad guys might come to our house. The principal wanted me to come in immediately to discuss the situation. I sat in the office with the principal and school counselor trying to explain what happened without making them panic about safety. They added a note to her file that only authorized people could pick her up and gave me a special code word to use. My daughter was confused about why I had to talk to her teachers, but I just told her it was grown-up stuff and she didn't need to worry. Thelma called the next afternoon while I was making lunch and asked if I wanted to talk to Carolyn, who'd been asking about me since the hospital. I said yes, even though my stomach got tight thinking about hearing her voice after everything that happened. She put me on hold for a minute, then I heard breathing on the other end before Carolyn said thank you in this broken voice that made me grip the phone harder. She talked fast about how she thought she was going to die in that trunk and kept thanking me over and over while I just stood there not knowing what to say back. She explained how her ex lost it when the judge said he couldn't have unsupervised visits with their kids anymore because of his anger problems, and that's when he snapped and grabbed her from her apartment parking lot. Her voice cracked when she said she'd been in that trunk since the day before without water and thought nobody would find her. I told her she was safe now, and that's what mattered, but she kept crying and thanking me until Thelma got back on and said Carolyn needed to rest. After hanging up, I went straight to the hardware store and maxed out my credit card buying new deadbolts, a doorbell camera that connected to my phone, and motion sensor lights for around the house. My daughter watched me drill holes and install everything, asking why we needed so many locks now. I told her we were playing a safety game and taught her our new code word, which was purple dinosaur, and if I ever said it, she had to call 911 right away no matter what. She practiced saying it a bunch of times and asked if dinosaurs were really purple, which made me smile for the first time in days. We practiced what to do if someone came to the door when I wasn't home, and she took it seriously, even though she thought it was just a fun game with Daddy. 3 days later, I went to check the mail and found a plain white envelope with no return address mixed in with the regular bills and junk mail. Inside was a single piece of paper with "Keep your mouth shut" printed in block letters that made my hands start shaking. I remembered what Cartwright taught me about not touching evidence, so I got kitchen gloves and carefully put the note and envelope in a plastic bag before calling the police. 2 officers came out and took my statement while bagging everything for fingerprints, but they said these kinds of threats rarely leave useful evidence since anyone can buy paper and envelopes anywhere. They increased patrols past my house again, but we all knew that wouldn't stop someone who really wanted to send a message. The official subpoena showed up 2 days after that in a certified letter I had to sign for, making everything feel more real and permanent than ever. It said I was required to appear as a witness in the criminal case with penalties including jail time if I didn't show up to testify. Thelma called after I texted her a picture of it and said this was actually good news because it meant the prosecutor was moving forward with the strongest charges instead of making a quick deal. She walked me through what would happen at trial and how long everything might take, which sounded like months of this hanging over our heads. Beckham called the next morning sounding frustrated because the defense filed a motion saying the gun they found wasn't even real, just some replica that looked scary but couldn't actually shoot. He had to bring in a weapons expert to test it and prove it was functional, which meant more delays and legal games that made me angry. I knew what I felt when that gun was pressed into my ribs, and whether it could shoot or not didn't change how scared I was or what he made me do. The expert confirmed it was real and loaded, but the defense kept pushing their argument anyway, trying to get charges reduced. HR sent a thick packet of paperwork about mental health leave options and short-term disability benefits if I needed time off work. The benefits coordinator called to walk me through everything, but I got lost in all the acronyms like FMLA and STD and waiting periods and percentage of pay. I kept working anyway because sitting at home made everything worse, and at least scanning groceries gave me something to focus on besides checking the locks every 5 minutes. Cartwright picked me up one morning saying we needed to go back to the Walmart parking lot to clarify exact positions for the prosecutor's case. My whole body tensed up pulling into that same lot where everything happened, but he had photos and diagrams we needed to match with the real locations. He asked me to show him exactly where the car was parked and where I stood when I made my choice about saving Carolyn. Being back there made me want to throw up, but it helped me remember details like the exact words the gunman used and how he held the gun. My statement got more detailed and specific, which Cartwright said would help in court, even though I wished I could forget it all instead. A week later, I got an email from some true crime podcast producer offering $5,000 for an exclusive interview about being the trunk rescue hero of the Walmart kidnapping. The money would have helped with the security stuff I bought and the missed work, but I deleted it without responding because this wasn't entertainment for people to listen to on their commute. Beckham called concerned because Carolyn was getting scared about testifying after her ex's family started calling her with subtle threats about what might happen if she showed up in court. She was thinking about backing out completely, which would destroy the kidnapping charge and weaken the whole case since she was the main victim. I understood her fear better than anyone, but needed her to stay strong so this guy couldn't hurt anyone else. The prosecutor had another meeting with her to go over safety measures and witness protection options if things got worse. Then the gunman's mother contacted Beckham with medical records showing her son had untreated bipolar disorder and needed psychiatric help, not prison. She provided documentation of previous psychotic episodes and hospitalizations, saying he wasn't in his right mind when this happened. Part of me felt a tiny bit bad for her losing her son to mental illness, but mostly I just wanted this whole thing over so my daughter and I could sleep through the night again without jumping at every noise outside. 2 weeks later at the courthouse, I sat in the witness chair gripping the wooden arms while the defense attorney paced in front of me, asking the same questions different ways. He kept trying to make me confused about what time things happened and where exactly the car was parked. I stuck to what I remembered even when he suggested I was making things up to get attention or a lawsuit payout. The prosecutor objected a few times, but mostly let me handle it myself while I explained over and over about the gun and the trunk in Carolyn's voice. After 2 hours of this back and forth, the judge finally said there was enough evidence to move forward with a trial. Walking out of the courthouse, my legs felt like jelly, and my shirt was soaked with sweat from the stress. Beckham caught up with me in the hallway looking frustrated because the judge had just thrown out the gunman's first statement to police. The arresting officer hadn't read him his rights properly before he started talking about why he took Carolyn. It wasn't going to destroy the case, but some of the kidnapping charges got reduced because of that technical mistake. 3 days after that, Beckham called me at home to explain they were talking about a plea deal with the defense. The prosecutor wanted 10 years minimum plus mandatory mental health treatment if the guy admitted guilt to everything. The defense was pushing for 5 years, claiming diminished capacity because of his mental problems and medication issues. I told Beckham I didn't care about the exact number as long as there was guaranteed prison time, so this guy couldn't come after me and my daughter. Meanwhile, my paid leave from Walmart finally ran out, and regular pay wasn't covering all the bills anymore. The security stuff I bought on credit cards was adding up, and I spent hours on the phone with HR trying to fix payment gaps in my checks. They kept transferring me to different departments, and nobody could explain why I wasn't getting the full victim compensation they promised. The financial stress on top of everything else made it hard to sleep even more than before. I looked into switching to night shift for the extra $1.50 an hour differential, but couldn't figure out childcare that late. My daughter's regular babysitter only worked until 8 p.m., and overnight care was more expensive than the extra money I'd make. Being a single parent meant every decision had to factor in what was best for her stability and routine right now. A week later, Thelma called about a support group for crime victims that met Tuesday nights at the community center downtown. I wasn't sure about sharing my story with strangers, but she said it might help to hear from other people going through similar stuff. The first meeting, I mostly just listened to a woman whose husband was killed in a robbery and a guy who got carjacked at gunpoint. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't going crazy with all the checking locks and jumping at noises. We talked about warning signs of PTSD and different ways to cope when the fear got too strong. One woman suggested keeping a journal, but my hands still shook too much to write clearly most days. The next afternoon at work, my coworker pulled me aside during break to tell me some guy came by yesterday asking questions about me. He said the man claimed to be doing a survey but kept asking specific stuff about my schedule and which car I drove. Security pulled the tapes and saw it was the gunman's cousin who'd been at the arraignment giving me dirty looks. They banned him from the property, but now I kept looking over my shoulder every time I walked to my car. My manager moved my register to one farther from the doors, but that didn't stop me from scanning every customer's face for family resemblance. Cartwright called that night saying the judge added GPS monitoring to the gunman's bail conditions after hearing about the contact attempt. Any violation would mean immediate jail time with no second chances, but Cartwright reminded me the system could only do so much. I needed to stay alert and report anything suspicious right away, instead of hoping it would go away on its own. A few days later, Beckham asked me to write a victim impact statement for the sentencing phase if we got that far. He wanted me to explain how this whole thing affected my life and my daughter's sense of safety. I sat at my kitchen table trying to find words for the sleepless nights and constant fear and checking the locks 5 times before bed. The first draft was just angry rambling about how unfair this all was and how my kids shouldn't have to practice code words for danger. The second draft got too detailed about the panic attacks and crying in my car after shifts. By the third try, I managed to write 2 pages about the real impact without sounding completely unhinged, but it still didn't capture the weight of living like this. Then Beckham called the next morning saying the defense filed a motion to exclude all victim impact statements from any trial or sentencing. Their argument was that emotional testimony would unfairly prejudice the jury against their client who was struggling with mental illness. It made me so mad that they wanted to silence our voices and pretend this was just about legal technicalities instead of real people's lives. Beckham said it was standard defense strategy, but the judge would probably allow at least written statements, even if we couldn't read them out loud. The ruling would come next week after both sides filed their briefs about why statements should or shouldn't be allowed. 3 days later, I was pushing my daughter on the swings in our backyard when I noticed a dark blue sedan creeping down our street for the second time in 10 minutes. The car looked just like the one the gunman drove that day at Walmart, and my stomach dropped as it passed our house again, going maybe 15 miles an hour with the driver looking right at us through tinted windows. I grabbed my daughter off the swing and told her we needed to go inside for a snack, trying to keep my voice normal while my heart pounded against my ribs. She complained about wanting to play more, but I picked her up and carried her through the back door, locking it behind us and pulling the curtains closed. The car made one more pass while I watched through a crack in the blinds and called 911 on my cell phone. 2 patrol officers showed up 20 minutes later and took my report, writing down the make and model I described, while one of them radioed dispatch to check if any similar vehicles were registered to the gunman's family members. They said without a license plate or proof of illegal activity, there wasn't much they could do except increase patrols on our street for the next few days. My daughter kept asking why the police were here, and I made up something about them checking on neighborhood safety while she colored at the kitchen table. That night after she went to bed, I sat in the living room with all the lights off, watching the street through the window until 3 in the morning when exhaustion finally won. The next evening my phone rang while I was making dinner, and Beckham's name showed on the screen. He said the defense finally agreed to a plea deal after months of back and forth, 8 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment and a permanent protective order for me and Carolyn. My hand gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached as he explained it wasn't the full 10 years they'd pushed for, but it guaranteed prison time without the risk of a trial where anything could happen. I felt this weird mix of relief that I wouldn't have to testify and anger that he'd served less than a decade for kidnapping his ex-wife and threatening me with a gun. Beckham said the sentencing hearing was set for next Tuesday, and both Carolyn and I could read our victim impact statements to the judge before the final decision. 4 days later, I sat in the courthouse hallway practicing my statement for the 20th time while my hands shook so bad I could barely read my own writing. Carolyn sat 3 chairs down looking pale and thin in a black dress, her own papers trembling in her lap as we waited for the bailiff to call us in. The courtroom felt too small when we walked in, and I tried not to look at the defense table where the gunman sat in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed to a chain around his waist. The judge called me first, and I walked to the podium on legs that felt like jelly, clearing my throat twice before I could get any words out. I read about the sleepless nights and checking locks and how my daughter had to learn code words for danger because of what he did to us. When I finished and looked up, the gunman was actually looking at me instead of staring at the table like before. Carolyn went next, and her voice cracked on every other word as she described 26 hours locked in that trunk, thinking she would die, the rope burns that took weeks to heal, and the therapy she'd need for years. Then something I didn't expect happened when the judge asked if the defendant wanted to speak. The gunman stood up slowly and turned toward us, saying the medication they put him on in jail helped him understand what he'd done, and he was sorry for the fear and pain he caused both of us. His lawyer had probably coached him, but his voice sounded different from that day in the parking lot, less angry and more tired. The judge thanked him for his statement, then announced she was accepting the plea agreement with additional conditions based on the GPS monitoring violations and contact attempts during bail. She added 5 years of supervised probation after his prison term, with 0 tolerance for any violations, saying one single breach would send him straight back to prison for the remainder of his original sentence. The words felt like a weight lifting off my chest, because it meant real consequences if he tried anything when he got out. 2 weeks passed and the news vans finally stopped showing up at Walmart, while the story got replaced by other crimes and scandals. My manager called to discuss my return to work, offering to move me to a register at the back of the store away from the main doors, and letting me take extra breaks whenever I needed them. Sandra checked in with me every single day my first week back, not in that fake, concerned way, but genuinely making sure I was okay without treating me like I might break. My first full shift went better than I thought it would, with only 2 times when the scanner beeping made my chest tighten up, and I had to step away to do the breathing exercises the therapist taught me. My coworkers didn't make a big deal about me being back, and the customers had no idea who I was or what happened, which let me just focus on scanning groceries and making change like before. The asset protection team asked if I'd help them develop new training materials for armed robbery situations, since I'd actually been through one, and could give real input on what helped and what didn't. Working on something positive that might keep other employees safer gave me this unexpected sense of purpose from the whole nightmare. They recorded my suggestions about silent alarms and evacuation procedures, and said they'd roll out the new training to all stores in the region. Miranda Doherty, the therapist victim services set me up with, met with me twice a week in her small office downtown, where we worked on identifying my triggers and building coping strategies that actually helped instead of just sounding good on paper. She explained how trauma changes your brain's alarm system, and we practiced ways to tell the difference between real danger and my body overreacting to normal stuff. Progress wasn't a straight line, and some days were worse than others, but slowly I noticed I could get through a whole shift without my heart racing, or make it through a night with only 1 nightmare instead of 3. 6 weeks after sentencing, I took my daughter to the park on a Saturday afternoon, and realized halfway through that I was actually watching her go down the slide instead of scanning the parking lot for threats. We stayed for 2 whole hours building sandcastles in the sandbox, and I was right there with her instead of lost in my head worrying about what might happen. That normal afternoon where nothing bad happened and I could just be her dad felt like winning something important. Later that week, Thelma called with an update about Carolyn, saying she'd successfully moved 2 states away to stay with her sister and started job training through a domestic violence program there. Hearing that Carolyn was somewhere safe and rebuilding her life brought me real relief because we'd both been through hell, but we were both finding our way forward, even if our paths looked different. 3 weeks later, Cartwright called to let me know the gunman got transferred to state prison to start his 8-year sentence. He said the judge ordered psychiatric treatment with medication monitoring, and the guy would serve at least 6 years before any chance of parole. Hearing those numbers made my shoulders drop with relief, because 6 years felt like enough time to rebuild everything. The next morning I got a call from HR saying they finally figured out my pay issues from all the time I missed during the court stuff. They deposited 3 weeks of back pay into my account, which covered the credit card bills from the security upgrades. I paid off the doorbell camera and motion lights, then put $500 in a new savings account for emergencies. Having that cushion made everything else feel less scary. The Employee Assistance Program sent approval for 12 more therapy sessions with Miranda, which meant I could keep going twice a week through the holidays. I told the benefits coordinator I wasn't interested in any more interview requests from podcasts or news shows. My story wasn't for sale, and protecting our privacy mattered more than any amount of money they might offer. 2 months after the sentencing, I picked up extra hours at the Walmart on Maple Street across town to help with their holiday rush. The first time the scanner beeped, I just kept working without my chest getting tight. Customers handed me cash and credit cards, and I made change like it was nothing special. My hands stayed steady the whole shift, and I didn't need any extra breaks. When I got home that night, I told my daughter about earning extra Christmas money, and she got excited about getting the doll she wanted. That weekend, we put up our tree and strung lights around the windows while singing along to holiday music. She made paper ornaments at the school that we hung on the branches, and I actually enjoyed watching her instead of worrying about safety. Going to bed that night, I walked through the house and checked the front door lock just once, then headed to my room. My daughter was already asleep with her stuffed animals around her, and I felt tired in a good way instead of wired from anxiety. Small changes like that showed me my body was learning to relax again. The Victim Compensation Fund sent a check for $2,800 to cover my therapy costs and home security expenses. I texted Thelma thanking her for helping me fill out all those confusing forms because I never would have figured it out alone. She texted back that she was proud of how far I'd come and reminded me to call if I ever needed anything. Having people who understood what happened and still wanted to help made everything more bearable. 3 days before Christmas, I needed groceries, so I drove to the original Walmart where everything happened. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed the clouds moving across the blue sky and how the trees looked bare for winter. I parked in a different row than before and walked inside with my list. The place didn't make my heart race anymore, and I could shop for milk and bread without looking over my shoulder. At checkout, I went through a different line than Register 6, but even seeing my old station didn't bother me much. Loading groceries in my car, I thought about how different this felt from just a few months ago when I couldn't even drive past without shaking. Life wasn't the same as before because that version of normal disappeared the day the gunman pulled out his weapon. But we built something new that worked for us with better locks and therapy appointments and friends who checked in regularly. My daughter was doing great in the school and making friends and seemed happy most days. I could work full shifts without panic attacks and sleep through most nights without nightmares waking me up. The fear wasn't completely gone, and probably never would be, but it got smaller and quieter over time. We were genuinely okay now, and that felt like enough. That's it for today's story. Thanks for letting me share it with you. I really do hope it brightened your day even a little. Stick around by subscribing and we'll do it again soon.